Welcome back to the Book Club. I'm Michael Knowles. This month, we are reading a truly magnificent novel, Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. First, though, in our fast-paced world, it is tough to make reading a priority. At least, it used to be. At thinker.org, they summarize the key ideas from new and noteworthy nonfiction, giving you access to an entire library of great books in bite-sized form. You can read or listen to hundreds of titles in a matter of minutes, from old classics like Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People to recent bestsellers like Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. If you want to, challenge your preconceptions, if you want to expand your horizons, if you want to sound smart at cocktail parties, most important of all, go to thinker.org. That is THINKR.org. No E. There's no time for that. Start your free trial. Put your mind in motion. We will be putting our minds in motion with Anna Karenina. Subtitle, Why You Shouldn't Cheat on Your Husband. Anna Karenina. Subtitle, Happy Wife, Happy Life. There are so many subtitles. It's a very long book. I am joined by my friend Inez Stepman. Inez is Senior Policy Analyst at Independent Women's Forum. Inez, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for picking this book, one of your favorite books, you told me, and a book that you have read 7 or 8 times or something. By my calculation, that means that you have spent every single minute of your life reading this book.
Yeah, and yet you still have to remind yourself every time, because there are so many sort of threads in this book that even if you read it 8 times, there will be something new that you forgot.
For these 800 pages that I hope everyone has already read, for the people who have not read it, could you give a summary of this book in 1 minute or less?
Everybody knows 2 things about this book: that it starts out that all happy families are alike, but every unhappy family is different in its own way. And I'm butchering it because he wrote it more beautifully than that. But
and in Russian, it's hard with the accent.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then they know how it ends, right? They know that Anna threw herself in front of a train and committed suicide. Most people know that going in. In between, leaving out many, many characters, the plot is that there are multiple couples here. There's Anna and Karenin, her husband, and everyone admires Anna, right? She's not only beautiful, she's good. She's kind. She actually, initially in the book, she comes in, she saves her brother's marriage by convincing his wife that she ought to forgive him for his infidelities. She is just beloved by all. She's elegant, she's charming. She knows how to hold, a great conversation with everyone. Her husband is a good man, an important man, perhaps a man who's a little bit didactic and inflexible in some ways, but everybody admires this couple. There are a number of other characters. One, Vronsky, the man with which she ultimately has an affair. And then a second couple who is very much a foil to this triangle of Anna, her husband, and her lover, Kitty and Levin. So Kitty is a young girl who comes in, initially pursues or wants to be pursued by Vronsky, which seems like a more natural match.
He's a young, hot guy, aristocrat, soldier.
Right. Yeah. And she's the debutante, the 18-year-old girl who comes in. And then there's Levin, who is a wealthy landowner who is in many ways Tolstoy's character for himself in this book, who is very concerned with living rightly and trying to figure out what that means throughout the book. Vronsky pursues Anna initially. He turns down Kitty, who turns down Levin. So there's all of these rejections in the opening of the novel, right? Kitty is embarrassed because she pursues a man who was only flirting with her. Levin is embarrassed because he's proposed to this young woman and has been rejected. He leaves the city, right? That's the setup of this novel. And Anna, of course, is married and initially rejects Vronsky's attentions, even though she is flattered by them. And then she has this famous love affair and eventually leaves her husband, lives with Vronsky for a while. They travel into different societies. There are children. There's death along the way. I think this is a story about how love and virtue cannot be separated and how we are the authors of our own destruction. It's a deeply moral book, but it's not a moralistic book, which is what makes it, I think, such a great read. This looks intimidating, but it isn't. There are many shorter books that are more intimidating than this, because you get this beautiful psychological omniscient portrait of each one of these characters, of their motivations, their emotions, how they think about things as they engage with each other and the world and the backdrop of pre-revolutionary Russia. I don't think this is actually a tough read at all. I think you said also you just kept turning the pages. You really do you fall in love with these characters, and you want to see them, see what happens and see whether or not they win their internal battles and struggles with essentially trying to be virtuous.
And this is something that Tolstoy really pioneers in the novel form, is that inner monologue, is that inner life of the character. So you're not just reading what the character is saying out loud or the arguments or conversations, but how the characters are interpreting facial movements, what they want to say but don't say, what they thought of saying after the fact when they go home. And one of the reasons that it's so easy to keep turning the pages, why you really can't put this novel down, is that on the one hand, you have the heights of tragedy. At another moment, you will have a discourse on political economy and the fashionable ideas moving through the political circles in Russia at the time. At the next moment, you'll have a comedy scene that could have been out of I Love Lucy or the Marx Brothers or something. And there's a scene in particular when Levin's brother is dying, and he's decayed and he's desiccated, and Levin goes, and Kitty insists on going, and it really tells you something about their marriage, and it tells you something about the difference between men and women, but it's a really sad, tragic moment. And just they say, okay, he's gone, he's dying, and then you hear the supposedly dead man. He says, "I'm not dead yet. Hold on, not yet." And it goes on for days. And eventually, the Levin says, "Oh, I just wish he'd die already. Why are we?" And so it can be actually laugh out loud funny, and then there is so much tragedy. The novel opens up with that very famous line, and then it opens up on Anna Karenina's brother, Stepan Oblonsky, who's a kind of minor major character. And Oblonsky has just cheated on his wife with the governess, with the babysitter. And his wife is going to leave him, and he's a kind of a frivolous man in many ways. He spends too much money, womanizes, and he says, "Oh my gosh, I'm being held responsible for my act. I didn't mean anything by it. I just wanted to shtup the babysitter. Why is that?" And Anna shows up. He sends for his sister to come to save their marriage. And she does. How does that woman, this paragon of virtue, this woman whom everyone loves, become this awful fallen woman who destroys multiple homes by the end?
One of the things about this book that it just plays to kind of everybody's biases, in the sense that everybody finds some character to blame this on in this book. And I think that actually the point is that none of them are like sort of bad. None of them are truly bad people. They are all seeking virtue in some way. So, and you're right. So it opens up with Anna saving her brother's marriage by appealing to his wife, Dolly, about how he can still love her. He can make these mistakes, but in fact, he can still have a regard for his wife, for his family, for his duties, and saves their marriage. Tolstoy also presages the end of the book as well, because the first time that Anna meets Vronsky, it's on a train, and somebody falls in front of the track and dies, and she's very impressed with his virtue because he pays the family of the man, right? These are all Russian nobility. So he gives the family of the dead man money, and she is touched by the fact that, he has this amount of virtue, that he's, moved by what happened.
Or is he moved by that cute little hot to trot Anna, and is he trying to impress her by giving money to the family?
One of the interesting things about the relationship between Anna and Vronsky is that she does end up loving Vronsky. He ends up loving her in a very serious and not frivolous way. This is not just a sort of lustful flirtation. They do fall in love. And I think without acknowledging that they did fall in love, the novel is cheaper, right? If you treat it as lustful flirtation, you don't get the point about how even real love can be so unbelievably destructive when it's decoupled from virtue.
Because it is simply wrong. She is a married woman, and it is wrong for them to get together. And yet he pursues her at the encouragement, by the way, of many of his aristocratic friends and relatives who live all sorts of degenerate lives. And then the moment that Anna actually does leave her husband, all those same people who encouraged the love affair turn on her and they say, well, we can't associate with this fallen woman. And so Anna does this. She leaves her husband. She leaves her son, even her beloved son, and goes with Vronsky. And you mentioned the train. The train is such an important motif in the novel. And it actually only occurred to me today on my drive into the studio, after I took a plane to land in Los Angeles and all that I can be in a totally different part of the country almost instantly, within a matter of hours, that the train is a symbol of modernity, that the train is a symbol of the new liberal social attitudes that are so at issue in the novel. I'm reminded of Russell Kirk, the late conservative philosopher, who described the automobile as a mobile Jacobin, that this ability to move places very, very quickly is a symptom of and a cause of also modernity and the upending of tradition. And it is the cause of the downfall of Anna Karenina and Vronsky.
After Anna does, for a long time, turn down Vronsky's affections, she's very flattered by them, but she returns to her husband, and she finds that even though she did the virtuous thing, she finds her husband deeply unattractive in a way that she didn't before, right? That she has, in fact, fallen in love with this other man. And Karenin has all of his faults, but those were faults that Anna did not find unlovable before, and she does after. And nevertheless, she does hold out for a very long time. She knows it's wrong, but eventually she begins this affair. She actually becomes pregnant with his child, and she confesses to her husband. He doesn't even imagine that the rumors could be true initially. He's just concerned with their reputation. His response is not to duel Vronsky. He actually reminds her of her duty to her marriage, to her son, and says, no, you need to come back into your marriage. I will have you back. But you need to come back to your duties. And she's unable to do that. And that's where she leaves even her son. They carry this affair openly. And the same, as you say, the society that had accepted these affairs as long as they weren't honest,
yeah.
Right? Anna and Vronsky are just more honest about their affairs than many of the other characters. And that honesty is, in its own sense, says something good about their character. But even honesty, as separated from virtue, just like love, is actually their undoing,
yep.
Right? If they had been a little bit more like Stiva, it probably would not have caused the kind of destruction that ends up happening. They try to find a society in which they'll be accepted. They try to kind of forget about their former life. They try to restart. They bounce around from Italy to St. Petersburg to Moscow. In many of these places, Vronsky's accepted, but Anna isn't. You can either say that's because he's a man and she's a woman, or you can say it's because she left her marriage.
Yeah.
And he was a single man. But the trains allow them to kind of just distract themselves for an ongoing period of time before the evil act that they've committed must actually play itself out and show up again.
There's a message for millennials here too. I've noticed this about millennials, even impulses that I might have myself. Millennials want to travel all the time. They don't want stuff. They don't want a house. They don't want a car. They don't want to get married, at least not very young. They just want experiences. They want to, and there was a wiser man who, I forget who said it, so maybe I'll just claim the quote for myself, but pointed out that the issue with frequent travel, people who travel frequently, constantly, seem to be trying to get away from something. But you can't ever get away from that thing that you're trying to get away from, because that thing is yourself. And so wherever they go, Vronsky and Anna find themselves the same people in the same situation. And Anna, lovable though she may be in the first part of the novel, by the end, she is deeply, deeply unlovable. She cannot love herself, which is why she commits suicide. She makes herself repellent to everyone around her, and everyone is trying to be good to her. At least the two men in her life. Karenin has tried to do right by her, at least as he sees fit. Vronsky says, no, I'll stay by you, even amid her wild jealousies, her insane emotional outbursts, her suspecting him wrongly of loving other women. He says, no, it's, lady, come on, sweetheart, I love you. I don't know why you think this way. And she becomes, she says by the end, she basically can't love her son, whom she has abandoned, and she's at various times wanted to get him back. She can't love her daughter. She seems not to be able to love everyone. In the final moments of her life, when she's in a kind of mania, she eventually finds herself right back there at the train station and ultimately kills herself. She just keeps looking at everyone and says, I hate that person. Look at that fat person. Look at that awful look. They're probably talking about me. I hate them. I hate them. I hate them. And in this mania, she flings herself at the train. But because we get the inner life that Tolstoy gives us, we also see that when she lands on the track, she wakes up. She says, wait, where am I? What am I doing? Oh no, I don't want to do this. Oh no, and as she tries to pick herself up, it's too late, and the train hits her. And there's such reality to this moment. Even people who jump off buildings, some people have survived that, and people who have survived jumping off buildings say that they instantly regretted it, as just anecdotally. And she instantly regrets it, and her final plea is, Lord, God, forgive me for what I'm doing. But she makes herself so deeply unlovable as she's pursuing love as the only object in her life.
Yeah, there really is a deep rebuke to sort of millennial ethos, and not just in the travel point that you made earlier, but in the pursuit of happiness and love above duty and family and virtue. And I think one of the profound themes of this book is, in fact, by pursuing happiness, you don't find it. And that's why Kitty and Levin are such an important foil. Tolstoy is quite critical both of sort of frivolous masculinity and frivolous femininity. Kitty is a sweet girl, but she is silly initially. And in fact, perhaps in some way unworthy of Levin's love and the way that he does love her. But and that's sort of the frivolousness of men, right? That he loves her even though she is silly. But we see them as a foil actually coming into their own as, a virtuous man and a virtuous woman to imperfect people who are helping each other actually to a type of domestic comfort and contentment, exactly because they are not pursuing happiness in this sort of passionate way that Anna and Vronsky are. And it really is a rebuke to sort of a modern conception of love, a modern conception of pursuing happiness as the highest goal. And the point here is that you don't even get happiness at the end, that you can pursue happiness as totally divorced from virtue. You can pursue love as divorced from virtue. But in the end, you will have neither happiness or love because it's divorced from virtue.
You see it especially with the kids. The most shocking and repulsive aspect of the novel to me is that she abandons her son. And she says, oh no, now I want to go back and see my son. And she goes back and sees him, and he breaks down. He falls ill. They say he could have died because he's just so, Mommy, where'd you go? You just ran away, and now you're back, and now you're not going to come back anymore. And she goes back and forth on, the importance of having her son near her. She then has this daughter with Vronsky who she doesn't seem to care very much for eventually. And then she says, we're not having any more kids. And Vronsky says, no, you need to get the divorce from your husband so that we can be a legit couple and get married, and then we can have more kids. She says, no, we're not going to have more kids. And she says, or she at least thinks, that his desire to have more children with her is because he doesn't appreciate her beauty, that she's not enough for him, basically. And you compare that to the marriage between Levin and Kitty. And Levin doesn't seem all that gung-ho on kids either. He seems kind of cool when his child is born. But then when he fears for their safety, he comes running over, and he really gets into the kid. He really gets into the family. He loves it. It gives him a great source of joy, and they're building something together. They're building this family together. Whereas for Anna, she ends up putting the cart before the horse. Love is a wonderful thing. Our desire for love is not something that should be suppressed or denied or anything like that, but it has to be put in the right direction, and it needs to be used as an instrument towards something that is greater. It has to have a point. It's not just about our frivolous longings and you go around blown as the wind pursuing whatever love affairs that you want. For Anna, it becomes the end in itself. And a man wrapped up in himself makes a very small package indeed, I say.
There really is that sense that they're pursuing something that's slipping away from them. And when you were pointing to the fact that Anna at the end becomes unlovable because she's so obsessed with clinging on to the only thing that can justify the decisions that she's made, right? Which is love for Vronsky. That's the great thing about seeing all the characters and how they think. She sees it in herself, and she has this battle every day. And in a similar way that once she falls in love with Vronsky, she battles with herself for a long time before giving in. She knows that in her jealousies, she's actually pushing Vronsky away, and he's actually admirable in kind of trying to get through that.
Yeah.
And trying to like be understanding and try to continue to love her despite the person she's turning into. But she knows all that. It's all visible to her in his face and his actions. And she knows it, and she has this battle with herself every day to not do what she feels compelled to do, to fly into these like sort of mad, jealous rages. Correspondingly, in Kitty and Levin, you see that a quite frivolous and young, silly girl grows into her deep femininity, and Levin kind of makes a lot of peace with married life, and the contentment it brings him when he sees her nursing his brother. The scene that you're talking about, where he's like, "I'm not dead yet," right?
I'm not dead, and he just cute. Well, a little bit more, a little longer.
But he realizes how she has like very deep virtues that he never can have.
Yeah.
And he sees her in a totally different way and loves her for it. There's almost like a physical sensation, at least to me when I read this, of descent and ascent, right? Of descending away from God and raising towards God is probably how Tolstoy would think about it.
And when you say an ascent toward God, when we're talking about Levin, say, you mean that in a very literal sense. The novel ends with his conversion. This man who has been agnostic, doesn't have very strong religious views. He is grappling with questions. Eventually, he begins to grapple with questions. He's trying to find himself. He says, should I leave the society and just live on a farm somewhere? I think a lot of us have that inclination sometimes when life gets too hectic. Should I go? I'll give it all up. I'll give up my aristocratic life. I'm going to go marry a peasant girl. I'm going to go live on a farm. That'll be fine. He said, no, that's not it. I'm not going to find happiness by pulling out of society. I'm going to find happiness in community, by helping to grow community, by having a family, by accepting the kinds of behaviors that create all the happy families. All the happy families resemble one another, and you're probably not going to reinvent the wheel. And even Kitty, even my probably not very intelligent wife Kitty, this silly girl in many ways, she has the faith of a child, and I, very intelligent Levin, I don't, and she's right and I'm wrong. And the peasants who just have an ordinary way of life, certainly the virtuous ones, people who just, he keeps going into churches, and the only people in the churches are old women and a beggar, and there's very, very few people in there, but they're right, actually. And all these genius, aristocrat, liberal, reformers, intellectuals, they don't know a damn thing. One of Levin's brothers is this high-minded, very celebrated sort of intellectual. He doesn't know anything. He flits from one intellectual movement to another. He has no wisdom whatsoever. And Levin ends the book getting a little bit of that old-time religion.
Tolstoy writes himself into this character, but what's very clear from the beginning with Levin is that he wants to be good, but he's interrogating himself and the world for what that means. And he ends up converting, but not in this like sort of like Tolstoy himself, not this sort of ardent way. Yeah. Where he has a sort of encounter with the divine, or in the way that he just accepts that there's so much wisdom and goodness that in fact he's never going to be perfectly good, and he has to accept some measure of imperfectibility and faith in his life.
Because he does have, there is a moment in which he says, I had this feeling. He has this sense of a kind of cosmic order and of the presence of God. But then, as you say, then he goes on and he makes some stupid mistake and he sins and he does that. He says, oh, so it's not just that everything is perfect. Okay, I guess that's the way it is, though. And as you say, he just kind of accepts it.
What I really like is that even the happy family life, right, is not what we would call happy. I mean, Kitty and Levin do not have a sort of blissful marriage, right? What they find is exactly what you're referencing with regard to faith. What they find is something, is contentment, is stepping into a role as a man or a woman, a wife, a husband, a mother and father, that stepping into those roles may not bring them sort of bliss, but it brings them something good, something better. And that's why, yeah, the happy families and the unhappy families. The happy families aren't really like they aren't blissful. And I think again, this is a totally different way than we tend to think about love and marriage today, where we think about it as, this soulmate concept, or like we think about it as that there's something wrong. For example, if we don't have those kind of blissfulness or whatever. In fact, this book says that is an illusion. The institution of marriage is much deeper than that. Your life is not something unusual because you suffer.
Yeah.
Right? Or psychologically or in turmoil. In fact, that is life. And that is the best that you can proceed towards is something like what Kitty and Levin have, which and that if you follow your sort of psychological turmoil, you can end up much, much worse off, even on the same metrics about bliss, happiness, whatever, pursuit of happiness.
What's unusual about these conclusions, I suppose, is that we consider them unusual. And that was true at the time of Tolstoy, this time of rapid social and political change that had occurred in the West and now was spreading through Russia as well. And he's writing in that milieu, and all the more so today. It's not as though that change has slowed down in any way. When Kitty, young 18-year-old cute Kitty, is up to be married, her mother is very upset. She said, in the old days, we would just arrange these marriages, and we don't do that anymore. But we can't let the people just choose their own spouses willy-nilly. She says, no one in Russia even knows what you're supposed to do anymore. And that's a profound observation. No, all the rules have just changed within a matter of decades, and now no one really knows what to do. And today we forget about we don't know what marriage is. We just redefined marriage in our own country within the last 10 years. Forget that we don't know the relationship between men and women. We don't know what men and women even are anymore. We can't even define it. A Supreme Court justice can't even define it. So we're at a moment, sort of like Tolstoy's moment on steroids, where everything is so deeply unsettled, and you've got a choice that you can make. The choice is, do I maybe give a little credence to the stuff that has always worked, even if it doesn't look like the extremes of my euphoric bliss, my fantasies of what could be, me and Vronsky riding off on a horse somewhere into the wilderness? Do I give a little deference to what works, or do I try to recreate everything anew and I'm going to figure it out? I'm going to settle this question of happiness once and for all on my own terms. Well, Tolstoy's got bad news for you, because all happy families, they kind of broadly look the same. And all the unhappy, there are a billion ways to have an unhappy family. But if you want to have a happy family, you pretty much got to kind of do the same stuff. And that, of course, comes especially down to pursuing the good. Just doing the good stuff. And maybe don't just think about your own personal pleasures and your radical fancies. This is, I think we would have to say, a very conservative novel. It takes the side of the conservatives against the radicals and the reformers. And there are a couple moments in it that subtly show you this too. Obviously, the broad themes of the book speak to that. But even these subtle moments where you'll have the reformers and the socialists and the liberals, and they'll say, here's our plan. We've got to create this brand new kind of public school system. And then Levin says, why do we need that? Well, because this is going to work to the benefit of the peasantry and the aristocracy. He goes, will it? I don't think anyone will. I'm not going to send my kids to those schools, and I don't think the peasants care, and they don't want to send their. Why do we want to do? Well, because this will change the position of labor in the economy. He goes, well, I don't know. All your theories on labor, they don't seem to be doing anything really at all. I'm just trying to make a couple extra bucks on my farm here. And he has this observation. He says, you're thinking about labor, as this abstract concept. He said, I'm thinking about the Russian peasants that I know. I'm thinking about the people that I can talk to, and I'm trying to think, how can I work my little parcel of land to make it work better for everybody and to make a little bit more money out of it. I'm not thinking pie in the sky, how to recreate the world anew. I'm just asking, hey, that person that I know, that custom that I know, that institution that I'm familiar with and that I've actually been a part of, what can I learn from that? What perhaps modest improvements can I make in a very practical way? That's going to be a better guide for life. Before we go, we have to get actually to the very first line of the novel, not the one that everybody knows, but the epitaph of the novel, which is, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay." It's an ominous way to start a book. What does it mean by the time we get to the end of the book?
I think it means you can't escape the consequences of your actions. You will be repaid. Acting virtuously repays itself and repays you in the end, not in a cheap sort of like, oh, if you're a good person, life is going to be easy kind of way. I'm not a religious person, but one of the things that's profoundly true about the moral teachings, for example, of the Bible, it's not from the exterior that's punishing you. It's not the society consequences. It's the consequences that are inevitable because of man's nature, that when you act in this way, those consequences will follow you and you won't be able to escape them. It's not the world imposing on you. It's the decisions you've made for yourself and the inevitable consequences of those decisions. It's way too easy to say, as so many liberal critics of this book do, that essentially the problem was that Anna lived in a patriarchal society that wouldn't accept her affair. It's such a cheapening. Human nature compels consequences when you act in certain ways, and you are the author of your own destruction when you do. And those are real life. Those are not sort of moralizing from above.
You're not religious, but you don't sound exactly irreligious either. Sort of like Levin, maybe. you have not only Tolstoy, but maybe you. And I think certainly as I read the book, you get to the end with a character like Levin, you think, wow, I'm glad he's working it out. And then you look at a character like Anna, you say, there but for the grace of God go I.
Right.
Don't want, and then you look at all those reformers and all those people with all their bright ideas and all their passions. And in the moment they say, no, what I'm doing is so right. I know everyone says it's wrong and all of history says it's wrong and all the books say it's, but I know and it'll work out for me. And it won't. Vengeance is mine. I will repay. All happy families resemble one another, and each, the many unhappy families that are on display in this novel, each can be very unhappy in their own way. Quite a warning to live in, especially to all those millennials and Zoomers out there who are watching it. It's an important word. It's a wonderful work of art and a very important warning. Okay, that's it. I've kept you too long. Inez, thank you so much for being here. Where can people find you?
You can find my work over at Independent Women's Forum, mostly on actually issues, for example, the definition of sex. So some very modern questions as opposed to these more important questions. And you can find me on Twitter at Inez Felcher.
You can find me right here next time on the Book Club. I'm Michael Knowles. Happy reading. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Book Club on PragerU. PragerU is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so we rely on donations from viewers like you to keep this content on the air. Please consider making a tax-deductible contribution today to help keep this content coming. Thank you very much.